All right, so welcome to the Time to Grow Up Dad podcast. And my name is Chong, and this is the solo episode slash reflection episode with my recent conversation with Tim. And most of these episodes are generally done either after I've recorded the episode or after editing it, just because I feel like these reflective episodes serves as a way to allow me to kind of get my thoughts onto the mic as fresh as I can, rather than letting my thoughts fester into oblivion. So, just for some context, and I think context is very important. Tim is a client of mine. I knew from our conversations Tim and his ex-wife have two kids, and I really want to kind of get his perspective and his take on parenting, because from at least his social media stuff, I know that he is a very, very great father, and I know that he had some insights. I think one of the biggest things that I'm personally working through with my own mental health at this point of the recording is, if you haven't catched the episode, highly encourage it. It was one of the things that Tim said which really struck a chord with me, in that the sacrifices we tend to make, particularly when it comes to making money, it's always going to be a sacrifice, right? And one thing he said really struck was when you go out to work and, when you're making money and you feel like you're not spending time with your kids, just remember that you are making money for them, and you're not just doing it just because you're trying to make money for the sake of it. And I think that really hits home, because for you, dear listener, if you're not familiar, my career, for the most part, does require me to work some very odd hours. Not that it's a bad thing, it's just that the hours are very in my control, but I am very much responsible of when I go to work and when I clock out. And when I do come to work, and even sort of as I'm recording this episode, when there are times where I hear my kid screaming in the background, because I do work from home, I always have this guilt in me, as if I'm not doing enough. Of course, I fully trust my wife's ability to look after the kid, but there's just that guilt in me that I'm like, oh my God, I'm working. I can be doing more. And what Tim said, as he was sort of talking through the process and sort of reflecting on what, his sacrifices that he's made, really did hit home. And literally the thing he said was like, hey, just remind yourself, if you're working, you're not spending time, to remember you are working, you are making money for them as well, which definitely made me feel a little bit better about myself. Something Tim also did mention was that whole ability to make sure that we should really sort of look to use our kids. Not I'm very much paraphrasing here, but having that ability to use our kids as a way to teach us lessons that we might not necessarily know are there. And the example in the episode he used was someone cutting you off, and if you're alone, you tend to go, road rage. Whereas if someone cuts you off and your kid's in the car, I think as a parent, you tend to have that moment of, maybe I shouldn't be shouting here because I've got people in a car who look up to me. And if you ever have a kid, you know that they will literally follow everything that you do, right? And I think that's also a good thing, because as a parent, you are always sort of forced to ensure that a lot of your day-to-day habits and actions and whatever that you do are going to be very much observed by your children. For context, I don't have, at this point of the recording, my kid is not able to string together sentences, let alone make certain words. But rest assured, I'm pretty confident that he is observing everything that we do. I'm also very confident that he's observing everything that we eat. And just today, we actually went out for lunch and we had dim sum, yum cha for for those who don't know what dim sum is. And I was eating something, and I'm sure it seemed like I was enjoying it, and he was pointing at that something that he wanted because he sees me eating it and me enjoying it. Kids are very observant, I feel, and even he's only 18, 19 months. I feel like the older they grow up, particularly in sort of Tim's case where they're sort of 5 and 7, the more they tend to mimic what you do. I think that's a very important lesson for myself to take away here, is to be very cognizant about what I want my kids to be, and more importantly, emulate that. Because they're very young, they don't really know how the world functions. We know as adults, if you're listening to this, we know how the world generally functions. And if we want our kids to be a certain way, act a certain way, talk a certain way, do certain things, eat a certain way, whatever, be a certain way to their friends, we need to show that example. Not because it's the right thing to do. It's purely because they are observant people and they will literally follow everything that you do. From how you smile and how you laugh. He laughs like his mum. Um, he he sits a certain way like me. Like there's a certain way that I sit when I sit on the floor, and he does that. He does that with his feet. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. And the conversation with Tim, the last thing I will say, this reflective episodes tend to be a little bit shorter, 7 to 10 minutes. Like I'll try to keep it under 10 minutes for the most part. The last thing from the conversation that I had with Tim, and I can't remember it was this off air or on air, but his advice was, at least the way I sort of interpreted what he said, was make sure whatever or however you want to teach your kids to do certain things, make sure they're doing it out of kindness. I think that's very important. I think the world needs a little bit more kindness. And the most important thing, I think my parents did this to me when I was very young. And I guess the theme of that episode of my conversation with Tim was everything's in retrospect. So in retrospect, when I was really young, my mom would take me to the orphanage and kind of show me around and show and kind of modeled and showed me the example of how to be kind to people in need. And I think that episode sort of really took me back to that time to allow me to know, to allow me to sort of go, hey, if there's something that I want to teach my kid how to live life, is to be kind to people. And I think that was a very big takeaway from that recording. So hopefully you, dear listener, enjoyed a bit of a reflection piece here. It's just really me rambling for 10 minutes. Hopefully we'll have more guests on the show. Hopefully you'll enjoy and support the episode. If there's anything that you'd like to see me cover with other parents, or if you're a parent and you're listening to this and you would like to have a chat with myself, please feel free to reach out. I'm very, very, very inclined to have a chat with anyone out there, particularly on parenting and growing up as a parent. And hopefully we'll keep this podcast alive. So that'll be all, folks.